So here's the new thing that is going viral on social media.
No pun intended.
In right-wing circles.
Yeah, because if you believe that mandatory face masks in public is bullshit, then you must be right-wing.
So it's a face mask exempt card, and it says the following: I am exempt from any ordinance requiring face mask usage in public. Wearing a face mask possess a mental and or physical risk to me. That's seems like a spelling problem, unless I'm just not getting something here.
Well, of course they didn't go through the effort to spell check it. They want to make it seem like it was from the government.
Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, I am not required to disclose my condition to you. Department of Justice ADA violation. Reporting number, and then it says 800-514-0301. If found in violation of the ADA, you could face steep penalties. Organizations and businesses can be fined up to $75,000 for your first violation and $150,000 for any subsequent violations. Denying access to your business or organization will also be reported to FTBA for further action.
Let's take a moment to appreciate the irony here. Circumventing threats of big government authoritarianism with threats of big government authoritarianism.
So, as far as hoaxes go, that looks like a semi-legit card there. Like, I could easily see people falling for this. I could easily see business owners going, whoa, I don't want to get sued, and this appears to be legit. Well, as you can see over my shoulder here, it says fraud.
Isn't it scary, though, that something like this is so believable? I mean, think about it. Our government is so bloated and bureaucratic and authoritarian that I can just make up some government agency, print out some official-looking documents, and people would just buy it as if it were normal.
It is a fraud. It is, it's something that a bunch of right-wingers came up with. There's this right-wing group, and they came up with this to try to get away with not wearing masks.
Or did left-wingers create it to try and strawman people who argue against mandatory face masks? Because either scenario is possible.
And listen, there's been a lot of these videos going viral now, too, of people getting really angry and over having to wear a mask.
Yeah, and making face masks mandatory actually encourages this type of behavior. Remember that video where I talked about that gentleman who got his cart taken away at Costco? Well, because of that little incident, that gentleman is now known across the internet. Well, what happens is people see people like him and think, oh, well, challenging these mask mandates is some sort of one-way ticket to internet fame.
And what I have to say to these people is, you really don't understand that is like the main thing that could have prevented all this.
Not really. I mean, even if the masks were effective at stopping or slowing the spread of the virus, there's still no guarantee the government wouldn't have used the pandemic as an excuse to power grab and shut shit down anyway.
In fact, my opinions have kind of evolved a little bit on the pandemic in general. Like, I was for all the shutdowns because I felt like, it's what you have to do in order to keep everybody safe.
Yes, you were a moron who believed that economic collapse and psychological suffering were preferable to something less likely to kill you than the flu. Yes, Kyle, we are very much well aware.
But actually, no, it turns out Japan, I think, had it nailed. Japan never shut down their economy. But what they did is they pretty much made sure everybody wears a mask. And as a result of just all it is mask wearing and maybe some reasonable social distancing. And as a result of that, less than 1,000 people died from the virus. Less than 1,000 people!
So he's using the relatively small number of deaths in Japan as an argument as to why the measures they've taken are effective. Well, what you have to understand about Japan is that their population is relatively small compared to the rest of the world. So of course, that would mean their mortality rate would look lower compared to the rest of the world, regardless of whatever measures they've taken.
And the only change is that everybody's pretty much wearing a mask. So when you look at that fact, now I think, oh, hey, we actually probably could have gotten away with not shutting down the economy if everybody wore a mask.
This assumes, of course, that the low death numbers in Japan are due to the masks. Japan's low death rates are actually due to a variety of factors. First of all, the Japanese just tend to be healthier overall. They eat more healthy food like fish and seaweed. Second of all, the Japanese tend to be more active. There isn't a whole lot of space for parking lots in crowded cities like Tokyo and Kyoto, which is why most Japanese opt to walk or take a bike instead of driving. So right from the onset, they're just healthier than we are. But some other relevant reasons are that Japan is an island country. They're isolated by ocean on all sides, so they have much more limited contact with the outside world than other countries do. And because Japan has a smaller population compared to the rest of the world, it's much easier for their healthcare system to manage the people who come in.
If they were crystal clear from day one, when this blew up, Trump went out there and said, we're going to mandate wearing masks. You have to wear a mask.
Now, the rest of you write a 15-page paper about the history of German automobiles in German.
It's the thing that's going to protect us. Well, guess what? If Trump led the charge on that, then his people would have been like, awesome.
How exactly is it, though, that Trump was supposed to lead the charge on that? I mean, states and even individual cities are having a hard time enforcing their mask mandates. How exactly do you think they would be enforced on a federal level? What exactly would be the plan to distribute to and make sure 300 million people are wearing masks all the time?
And I don't think the Democrats would have objected.
You really think so? Because the Democrats ruthlessly criticize every single move Donald Trump makes. Like, Donald Trump could personally take money out of his own presidential salary and use it to build homeless shelters, and the liberals would find something to complain about.
Particularly because at the time it was a pandemic, everybody understood we got to do something to fight the pandemic.
Yeah, we gotta do something to fight the pandemic. Wash your hands, avoid sick people, proper hygiene. These are things that you should really be doing anyways, pandemic or not, but none of these require big government, force, or threats of coercion of any kind.
And even though, yes, there's this rush to make everything partisan.
And which side do you think it is that's primarily leading that rush? Is it the conservatives who want to control and regulate every little goddamn aspect of our lives?
As a general rule, the Democratic side believes more in science. They believe in, they believe climate change is happening. They believe in evolution.
Right, but a lot of the people who criticize climate change aren't necessarily people who don't believe in science. For example, a lot of experts say that government environmental regulations actually do a lot to hurt the environment, and that the underappreciated and often demonized nuclear power is the best way to reduce CO2 emissions. I don't want to go too off the rails here, but I do think it's useful to point out that people who criticize a particular course of action based on a piece of science are necessarily arguing against that science.
So it's like, I think that if we could have gotten 8 out of 10 people to wear a mask, we could have avoided all this. And in fact, there was a study that came out. They said our deaths would be 1/12 what they are if we wore a mask, if we were just doing mask wearing.
Even if that were true, it doesn't necessarily follow that forcing people to wear masks is the best way to get people to wear masks. If anything, mandating the wearing of masks is going to make it less likely that people wear them because they'll see it as a chore, something that's imposed onto them rather than something that they're doing for their own safety. If you're going to have large numbers of people wearing masks, it's important that they're doing so because they want to, not because they have to, because the resources to monitor and enforce those people 24/7 simply don't exist.
So for people to, now that this is super political, and now that there are battle lines drawn.
And who do you think it is that made it political? Who do you think it is that drew those battle lines? Here's a hint. Was it the conservatives or the liberals who advocated that we point guns at people who just want to earn a living, and then put a band-aid over the subsequent economic harm with socialism?
It's really upsetting, because it's like, do you not understand? This isn't a little thing.
If this is the entire population of the United States, over 300 million, then this tiny square is the total number of COVID-19 deaths so far, according to the government. And out of that number, only around 2% of those deaths, this even smaller square, represents COVID-19 deaths among people younger than age 45. And even in that tiny square, nearly all of those people already had serious pre-existing medical conditions causing them to have weak immune systems. So, for young, healthy people to be worried about dying from this disease is just ridiculous.
This is actually really important. And, mandating mask wearing is, when it comes to the law, it's probably akin to just making people wear seatbelts. Is that some sort of obscene violation of your freedom and liberty?
Well, it's not, because the government owns the roads and therefore has the right to implement rules for them. The reason these mask mandates pose a threat to our liberties is because the government is trying to make rules for other people's property, for private businesses. See, you have the right to say nobody's allowed on my property unless they wear a mask. You have every right to do that because it's your property. However, if you say nobody's allowed on Jason's property unless they wear a mask and Jason is obligated to enforce that, well then that's a problem. You don't have that authority.
It's just a basic regulation to make sure that fewer people die.
Assuming that these masks are actually effective at stopping the spread of the virus, this regulation, as you call it, wouldn't actually save people's lives, it would endanger them. Why? Well, because unless what you have in mind is a suggestion or advice, the person who's being told to wear the mask is being put in harm's way. If they refuse, they get kidnapped into a cage or even killed. That's a problem with laws passed for your own good. Since all laws are basically threats of violence and put people in danger, there's no such thing as a law that's for your own good. They all put you in danger. They all put you in harm's way.
Now, I do think there is a conversation to be had, in general, the conversation about freedom and liberty versus safety, that is a reasonable discussion to have.
I mean, I think people should have the right to do as they please so long as they're not hurting anybody. That's basically what the non-aggression principle says. Like, I don't get what's rocket science about don't hurt people.
When you're talking about a pandemic, I don't think wearing face masks and mandating it is tyrannical or anything like that.
You don't think it's tyrannical? Okay then, explain to me in detail what should happen to people who refuse to wear masks.
I think it's just really important health regulation policy.
Well, if that's how you feel, well, there's nothing stopping you from spreading the word. Do some quick research, gather some data about how effective masks are at keeping people safe, publish it, get the word out there, convince people voluntarily to wear masks. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. The only thing you can't do is point a gun and say, wear a mask or I'll hurt you.
And it could have prevented a lot of death and destruction.
You know what else could have prevented a lot of death and destruction? Ending the stupid shutdowns. So instead of having people starve to death or commit suicide, they're out getting exposed to the virus and building up an immunity.
And this is how far people are willing to go to not just take basic precautionary measures, man. And it's really scary. It's really crazy.
What's really crazy and scary is how fucking quickly government ballooned up just because a few people are getting the sniffles all of a sudden.
All this effort going into this.
Hey, try breathing through a fucking face diaper all day in the July heat. Yeah, Kyle can sit there in his comfy little studio without a mask on and morally high horse about how everyone else should wear masks.
And then some people who are probably taking part in this are gonna, get sick.
Well, in my opinion, that would make a good argument to try and convince someone to wear a mask voluntarily, that if they don't, there's a chance they'll get sick. But at the same time, I feel everyone should be free to determine what level of risk they're willing to accept. Maybe I'd rather have an increased chance of getting sick than wear a mask. That's my business.
And it didn't have to be like this. It didn't have to be like this. It really didn't. And now we're doing even worse than we were when coronavirus started. We just hit the single-day record the other day.
Well, I'm sure you'd believe that if you just listened to CNN's talking points that didn't actually back it up with actual data. There's small, slight increases in very specific areas. It's not the nationwide resurgence that the left wants you to believe it is. You know where you won't find CNN talking points regurgitated? My Patreon page. Link will be in the description. This has been Philosophossum, making stupidity play dead. Have a good one.